Greater Bethlehem and friends. We want to welcome you to our Wednesday evening Bible study. This lesson will be coming from the book of Genesis, the book of beginnings, and we are still covering the life of Joseph. I want to challenge everyone. It's such Joseph was such a great man. From Genesis 37, and I might not be exact, but from Genesis 37 to about Genesis 50, we'll cover the life of Joseph. So when you are sitting down or have some time or and want to just go through the life of Joseph, it's such a great ordeal. He went through ups and downs. He reminds us of humankind in general at large. We have all been Joseph at some point in life, or we will all be Joseph on some of the occurrences that happen in his life. Today's topic, as you grab your Bibles, I know you don't have to thumb through them because it's Genesis. It's the book of beginnings. We're going to go to travel to chapter 45, and when we do that, we're going to go to the first verse. And we're going to read verses 1 through 15. We're going to omit verse 9, but verses 1 through 15, Genesis chapter 45. Before we go, though, the subject today is going to be forgiveness. And the lesson topic is revealed love, according to the standard commentary. But we will learn one of the greatest lessons that have been taught and shown on forgiveness, and that's through the life of Joseph. Joseph, just a little history. We always want to give history. Joseph's father was Jacob. Can't talk about Joseph without talking about Jacob. Jacob had 12 sons. 2 of his sons were by his love, which was Rachel. And Rachel had 2, Benjamin and Joseph. Benjamin and Joseph. Joseph was loved so much and was Jacob's favorite, and he showed favor for him. He also gave him a coat. He's known as the man of many coats, but he gave him a coat. And when the other kids was out working, Jacob would keep Joseph home. And then he would send him, the little lad, to go look after the other guys, and see what they were up to. So you can imagine how when one child has more favor and know it, how they tend to act with their other siblings. So just to revamp everything and go through the life of Joseph. Joseph one day went out to his brothers. His father sent him out to go check on him. He checked on them, and he decided to tell them he had a dream that they was going to all bow down before them. They got so mad that they decided to sell they was going to kill him, but then they decided to sell their brother into slavery. Long story short, 20 years later, Joseph ends up being the second in command of Egypt. So he's an Egyptian now. They have no clue where he is or where he went. And as he is over all of Egypt, he is second in command to Pharaoh. So there's a big famine, and it's a famine everywhere. It's just like what we're in right now. There's a pandemic, and it touches the whole land. There's not a piece of land that it doesn't touch. So you can imagine something national like this going on. We can relate to it. There's a big pandemic, there's a big famine, and it's going to last a while, probably I think 2 more years or 3 more years by the time Joseph encounters to his brothers. So Pharaoh finds out that Joseph's brothers are coming to town, and he lets them meet with him and ends up giving them all of the nicer land and let his family come on over to Egypt so that they won't starve. So we're going to pick up right here. You found it probably, Genesis chapter 45. We're going to put it on the screen. Genesis chapter 45, 1 through 8, and then 10 through 15. And we're going to learn a lot about forgiveness today. Here we go. Verse 1. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, and we're reading from the NIV version, "Have everyone leave my presence." So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Verse 4. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will no longer be plowing or reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then," verse 8, "it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of all of Egypt." Then we're going to go to verse 10. We're going to omit verse 9. Verse 10. "You shall live in the region of Goshen, and be near me. You, your children, your grandchildren, your flocks, your herds, and all that you have. I will provide for you there, because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise, you and your household and all who belong to you will become destitute. You can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin, that it is really I who am speaking to you. Tell my father about all the honor accorded me in Egypt, and about everything you have seen, and bring my father down here quickly." Then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin, and he wept. And Benjamin embraced him, weeping, and he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. Afterward, his brothers talked with him. All right. There's a lot of meat on that bone. And I tell you, it is going to be so good, because forgiveness is something that we all need. I always think about introductions and some of the great orators or the great presenters that have to introduce the next person. And one of the things that Joseph's life, if not only is he a man of excellence, but one of the things you can remember him for is he showed forgiveness. And true forgiveness is what he showed. So what we will find out as saints, that it is required of us to forgive. It's easier to say that you're forgiving someone than to actually do it. It's some workable things that we have to work through in life when we are the ones that are offended. But Joseph displays his love to his brothers. And as we will see, and as we just read, that he told them, "Don't be so hard on yourself. God did that. What you thought you did, God was preparing me for such a time like this." And it's so refreshing to know that we hold on to the little small things. As human beings and as saints of God, we have to practice forgiving a lot more. We all can do this. This is something that we all can partake in. The forgiveness also, it can leave you so bitter, and it's not attractive. So as the saint, not forgiving people is unattractive, and then it makes the next relationship hard too, because you're holding on to the baggage from the past. So as we get instructions, and we learn right here from Genesis, as we go through the life of Joseph, that forgiveness is such the key. So back to the introduction. If you have to bring me up for some reason and I'm the guest speaker, you can just say, Sister Rise is forgiven. It's the best title you can give me. And that's why I said that. Just introduce me as a child of God who has been forgiven. And it's simple as that. We can go from there. And a lot of people would love that title because Joseph was great. But the greatest attribute, and he was a man of excellence. He was so many things. He wore so many coats. But he was greater than great. But if he was here, he would say, I've been forgiven. And it's such a blessing to be on either end of the forgiveness, on the receptive end that where you were shown forgiveness, and on the end where you were offended and you had to forgive. So either way, it is a blessing when we partake in the forgiveness of God. Let's go to verse 1, and then I'll go through it again. Then Joseph could no longer contain himself, so he cried out. Okay, finally, y'all. It's been 20 years. He hasn't seen his brothers, and he's been through prison. He's been through hard times. Imagine being sold into slavery. He's about 17 years old when he got sold into slavery. And after being put in jail, and after he worked for Potiphar, and then Mrs. Potiphar accused him of the entanglement that didn't happen. There was so much stuff that happened. Then he went to prison. And then, remember, he's always been a dreamer. And part of him sharing his dreams with his brother is what got him sold. So Joseph the dreamer has had one life, but worth talking about, worth noting. Once he got into prison and then out of prison, he had asked somebody that he interpret dreams from in there to remember him. And they did. And this is a little flashback from a couple weeks ago. So Pharaoh made Joseph second in command over all the land. So he is in a position where he can help not only himself, but his whole entire family. And he does do it. He has a right to be bitter, but it's not the right thing to do. And you know, I always say having a right to do something doesn't make it always the right thing to do. We have to always remember that. Joseph, after not seeing them for over 20 years, he reached out and he wanted to cry. And here's something that we don't see, but it's ever present. He takes everyone, his servants, outside the room. Remember, he's speaking in Egyptian, so he's not speaking the same language as his brothers. He's not speaking Hebrew, which he knows it, but he always has an interpreter there. So up until now, they just think he's this big wheel, which is the head of Egypt. So they don't know. But finally, he can't hold it any longer. He longs for them. He misses them. He wants to see how they're doing, and rightfully so. We miss each other too. We let a year or two go by before we see our siblings, but 20 years, that's a long time. So finally, we're here. He made himself known to his brothers. Now, theological and Bible scholars go way into depth on that, and they even talk about them showing about them circumcision, but we won't go that far into that this time. He's being acquainted with them. In other words, it's me. Hey, Tori. Hey, Janie. It's me. Those are my sisters. It's me. Hey, Butchie. It's me. It's Roz, 20 years earlier. Now, my sisters and brothers wouldn't have done that because I was not that kind of spoiled. But Joseph was, and they did. And here's where we are. Verse 2 says, he wept loudly that all of Egypt heard him. Now, he took everybody out the room for two reasons. And this is still another lesson of forgiveness. He took them out the room so that they wouldn't know the hurt that his brothers had done to him. So because it would get back to Pharaoh, if that makes sense. If he knew that the brothers was the cause of him being in prison and the hurt that they had really done, Pharaoh probably would not allow him to help his family. And I'm going to put a pin in it there. When someone hurts you, Bethlehem and friends, true forgiveness is not to broadcast it to everyone else. Because what you're really doing is showing someone else the pain that somebody else caused you so that they can resent that person. And that's not of God. True forgiveness is to fall on your knees and tell God about it. Now, I get it. I'm trying to be real transparent, because when the hurt or the offense first happens, you do talk about it. Yeah, I might tell Brother Steve, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is what happened. But when you know you have truly forgiven, is no need to have someone else to know about that hurt that that person told you. Because in time and being on your knees, God can fix that. And he'll take all of that away. You tell God about it. I just experienced restoration from a brother, and I did that. In the beginning, I was hurt, and I had to tell somebody about it. Not tell someone to make that person look bad, but I talked about it because it had just happened. But soon after that, I fell on my knees and I didn't talk about it no more. And the restoration came, and it was the relationship has been restored, and that's what I wanted. But sometimes, get this, Bethlehem, sometimes it will never go back to being the same. Sometimes, if you think about Paul and Mark and Barnabas, they are just going up into the New Testament. They were not the same afterwards. So they were restored. The forgiveness had taken place, but they went on about their journey. So they entered into each other's lives for a season, and that season was over. So sometimes total restoration, where the relationship is not always restored as it was, will not happen. So, but it was true forgiveness that Joseph gave his brothers. And can you imagine? Can you imagine being the person that actually sold your brother into slavery? Didn't know what happened to him. You knew the outcome. You knew how your father felt after his child didn't come back home. You knew the hurt that it caused. And all of a sudden you're faced with that person. It doesn't matter if they're blood kin or it was an offense. It doesn't matter. And you are trembling. And that's exactly what they were doing. Uh-oh, it must be time for him to pay us back. But vengeance is mine, says the Lord. I will repay. And Joseph displays this like no other. He displays forgiveness. We have to look at every aspect of it. So he didn't allow the Egyptians to know what his brothers had done. He kept that between themselves. So in other words, he covered them. And we have to do a lot more covering with each other as saints. Because the little offense that was to me, it was minor, because in time we can heal offenses. But in Joseph's case, the covering of his brothers is what he needed. We have sisters and brothers and siblings that don't conform to what we want them to do or how we want them to act. But there is a way to restore and retain and refrain the relationship, and that is to fall on our knees. Maybe it's us that need to change. You know what? And sometimes we are really offended, and sometimes our friends treat us better than our blood kin. We have to take all of that into account and then talk and tell God about it, because it's hard to talk to the person that offended you, and it's easy to talk to God. So God is asking us to step up to the plate and be willing to forgive, be willing to restore, be willing to talk to God about it instead of telling someone else that that person offended you, and now someone else is feeling some type of way about that other person. It did nothing to them. And here's a perfect example to my married couples. When you and your spouse get ready to have a misunderstanding, it is sometimes not wise to tell the in-laws, go ahead and tell your sisters or your brothers, because where God is going to call you to forgiveness in that relationship of your marriage, your sisters and brothers won't, because you've shared to them what you should have. So if someone else hurt you, and I'm not saying everything has to be kept secret, but some things you don't want to take outside your marriage. Now, I know Sister Raj is not married, I know, but it's wholesome advice. I know it is. And I know I'm helping somebody. We can't tell everything about it, because you're going to end up forgiving your spouse, which is what we want anyway. And your siblings or your parents are not, because they hurt my child. And I'm giving another example. I'm more susceptible to forgive you from offending me, because this is hard stuff that we have to deal with. It's real life, but it's hard. But if you lay your hands on Carlos, it's going to be a while before I forgive you. It's real talk. So me Okay, I'll forgive you. My child, it's going to take me some knee bending for that one. And I'm just being as real as I can. So not saying that I can't, but what I'm saying is it's harder for me to forgive when you hurt someone I love. It's personal. It's harder for me to forgive you because I took it. Okay, I can handle that. But when it's somebody I love, my child, my sister, my brother, then that's next level forgiveness. And that's where we are. Joseph is displaying, I don't know any of our siblings that have sent us away, sold us in slavery, forgot about us, and we ended up in jail and being away from them for 20 years. I don't know anybody's siblings that have done that. And so he said, after they're in his presence, don't tremble, don't be afraid. I forgive you. It wasn't you that did it. God sent me before you to be the ruler of another country, to bring you out of your country because you're going to starve to death. Now I'm the head in charge, and I'm going to give you land over here. And while you at it, let me pay closer attention to my brother Benjamin, because remember, we have the same mother, and I want to see him. I want to make sure, because you all knew, though these two, me and Benjamin, was Jacob's favorite. You knew we were my father's favorites. And I want to make sure you didn't do to Benjamin what you did to me. There's a protection mode that goes into place with Joseph. He sends him back and goes, bring Benjamin. And so as the brothers come back, they do, and we'll find out throughout the story. I tell you all the story before we read the scripture, but that's why I read it first this time. Again, Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still living? Isn't that something to not know that your parent? I recently, 4 years, 2016, lost my mom. I don't know what I would do if I was away from her while she was living and had breath in her body, and I didn't know. So here's Joseph. Is my father still living? But his brothers were not answering. They didn't answer him. They were still terrified. And then verse 4 says, Joseph said to his brothers, come close to me. Come here. When they had done so, he said, I'm your brother Joseph, the one that you sold into Egypt. Now remember, he looks different. He's 20 years old. He was 17 when he left. He's 39 now. So after 22 years have passed. After the time had passed, he does look different. And the other thing that they didn't recognize him from the beginning was he was speaking Egyptian. He had an interpreter to them, even though he knew the language. He just didn't want them to know who he was yet. He was still making things right. He didn't know that what Pharaoh was going to give him the better part of the land so that he could bring his family there. He didn't know all of that yet. So with that being said, it says, and now do not be distressed. I love this verse. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me into slavery. Because it was to save that lives that God sent ahead of you. It was for me to save lives. I'm sorry. Hopefully you can hear me now. I'm talking so much that I made the mic go down. It says, for 2 years now, there has been famine in the land. In the next 5 years, there will be no plowing and reaping. So again, it's the whole land. We're right there. The pandemic is the whole land. Everybody's being affected by it. So Joseph and his family's been affected by it too. But he is the ruler of the country. Come on here. So, but God sent me ahead of you to preserve you for a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. Look at God. So he took a 17-year-old boy and and allowed the hurt into that particular child. And then he made that 17-year-old boy the ruler of Egypt. And then it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of all of Egypt. And then verse 10, I'm going to skip over, I'm going to read it all. You shall live in the region. So Joseph now, after he has seen his brothers, after he has shown them true forgiveness, after he has displayed the godly attributes that we all need. We all need forgiveness. His brothers are restored. They do, in the end of the story, they do go back home. They do bring everybody. They bring their land, they bring their cattle, they bring their wives, they bring their kids, they bring their father. Everybody is back. And And basically God saved their life because they were going to die. There was nothing, you couldn't produce anything out the ground. So hopefully this lesson has taught us to not be so hard with one another. It's the one another's that we need. It's situations that we are in, and sometimes we can't control it and sometimes we can't. But remember, whoever's over anything is, there's a lot of stress and pressure that comes with that. Don't be so hard. Let's be more forgiving of people. Sometimes we omit to do things, and sometimes we might have just did it. But whatever it is, charge it more to our head for not thinking than to our hearts. I want to conclude tonight's Bible study by saying true forgiveness is something that you have to practice. It is not natural. It does not come natural to us. It's something that you and the Lord have to work on together, and it's done on your knees first. This is Sister Roz. I love you, and we look forward to seeing our pastor on Sunday. Have a good night.